Good afternoon, everyone. I am super humbled to be here. So as Pat said, my name is Jacque Istok. I'm the Vice President of Worldwide Sales for VMware Data Solutions. We'll get more into that perhaps along the way. You're not here to listen to me, but about 17 years ago, I started this journey to try and help organizations make sense of and take advantage of the data that they have. And I'm still here today helping solve those problems across both private sector and public sector. I thought I'd kick off this whole session because I think, unfortunately, artificial intelligence and machine learning can mean very different things depending upon who you ask. And I'll bet you in this room of, say, 50 people, 100 people, however many of us are here, if I asked you, I'd probably get like 150 different answers. And so now I'd like to just kick off the panel asking each of you guys, or whomever would like to respond, when you think of artificial intelligence and you're explaining it to someone like my grandma, how do you explain what it is?
So I should probably start simply because you're going to find out very quickly I'm going to be the least technical of the panel members up here. So when I thought about this question, I thought about how would I explain it to myself or learn about it myself.
Wait, before you do, can we ask?
Yes, yeah, real quick. My name is Roger Hill, and it's really a privilege to be here with you all this afternoon. I have the privilege of serving as the sector leader for the defense, security, and justice sector at Deloitte. So we service the United States intelligence community agencies, the Department of Defense, Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security within my sector. It's great to be in Austin. I started my career as an Army officer and spent 5 years in the Army, and then for the last 23 years, I've been deeply committed to serving the missions, particularly across the intelligence and Department of Defense communities, and just really excited. I just recently took this role about 8 weeks ago, so I'm getting my feet underneath me, and again, it's just really a pleasure to be here. So when I think about, to your point, Jacque, there's continually more and more data that's available to us as professionals. And the complexity of the problems we're trying to solve and the insights we're trying to gain and the questions we're trying to answer, are becoming all the more complex. And so I think about, AI, I think about its ability to augment or in some cases replace the ability to conduct sense making, which could lead to improved decision making, right? And then ultimately inform action taking, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so, it's really about as simple as that to me, right? And obviously, there's a lot of different capabilities and competencies that can do that, but we're going to talk about as a panel, and we said it earlier, there's a lot of cultural and talent aspects as well, not just the technology itself. So that's something I'm really looking forward to talking about, because I think for those that are less versed, may not really, they think of it just as the technology sense of it versus the other adjacent things.
Almost the application of the
Right.
machine learning can help drive organizations to become data-driven.
Well said. I agree.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Rachel Grunspan. I'm the director for AIM at OD&I, which is the Director of National Intelligence. AIM stands for Augmenting Intelligence Using Machines, and this is the effort that is looking to integrate and coordinate a lot of the AI efforts across the community, 18 elements in total. My background, my home agency is actually CIA. I started off as an all-source analyst, so the simplicity and the communication thing is near and dear to my heart. But I've been in and around emerging tech for my whole career. So the way I would kind of approach that, I mean, at the most basic, it's know your audience, it's keep it simple, and then use analogies as much as you can. And I actually heard a gem of one last week, which I will share with you. Probably like a lot of you in the room, you've been playing around with ChatGPT and generative AI. So I have been trying to explain generative AI to friends and family and also at work. So I'm listening to a podcast. I don't remember which one. But it was an amazing way of explaining generative AI. It was a mashup of a quote I think Steve Jobs did many, many years ago with another piece of it. But it was, let me get this right. The phone is a bicycle for your voice, the way generative AI is a rocket ship for your mind. And that just really, really struck me because I got a lot less bewildered faces in trying to explain that concept.
I love that, and it takes advantage of the fact that everyone is hearing about ChatGPT right now.
Right.
Love it.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really excited to be on this panel. My name is Neil Serebryany. I run a company called Calypso AI. And at Calypso AI, we're dedicated to securing machine learning models from data all the way to models deployed in production. It's a really good question. And going back to this kind of model of analogies that Rachel was talking about, I always like to start with a really simple analogy. You know, I'm fortunate enough to have this cup of coffee in front of me. I really need this cup of coffee, by the way. And with this cup of coffee, I can easily take 10 images of this cup, and then I can take 10 images without the cup. I can classify, those images, cup of coffee, and then I can take 10 images without the cup of coffee, and I can train a really, really simple classification model that will recognize that there's a cup of coffee, or it won't recognize that there's a cup of coffee. Now, there are a bunch of problems inherent to this, starting with the fact that my classification model might not be detecting the cup of coffee. It may be detecting one of your faces, or it may be detecting another object. But at its most basic level, anyone should be able to build a machine learning model in 20 minutes. There are lots of services online that will help you make one, from Google Colab to AWS SageMaker to Azure. And it should be really interpretable to people to understand the benefits of actually applying machine learning. Please.
Got it. So if you just took a picture of your coffee, yes. 10 of them and 10 of them.
10 without, yeah.
10 without, you'd be able to detect whether or not there was a coffee there or not. What if I had a Starbucks coffee? Would you be able to do that?
My model probably would not be robust enough with such a limited amount of training data, going back to your point earlier.
So then what would you do to improve your model?
So I would do a number of things. One, I would actually change the scenarios that I'm taking this cup of coffee in, meaning the backgrounds, the data around the model. Two, I would make sure that I'm doing a really, really good job of creating bounding boxes for the cup of coffee from the data and kind of go into their data cleansing process. And then three, I would make sure to have a lot more data. Generally people say on the order of 1,000 images of the scenario that you're trying to correctly be able to classify, and 1,000 images of the scenario you're not trying to directly classify. And then we can go far, far more complex as we start to talk about foundation models or large language models, or we start to talk about some of these consumer applications of machine learning.
Gotcha. So it's safe to say the more data you have, the more accurate your models actually can get.
Yeah, I think that's a generally really, really good correlation. And one of the reasons why machine learning models have gotten so much better, both in the last couple of years as well as on a larger time horizon. If we look at Geoffrey Hinton's advances at the Polymer Institute, and if we look at machine learning as a whole, where the amount of compute we have available to us has just been exponential. If you want to look at the largest large language models from 2017, they were 100 million parameters. Today, the largest machine learning models, GPT-4, which is not out, is 100 trillion parameters, just to give a sense of that kind of scale differential.
Got it. That is super interesting. Once you took it there, my analogy suddenly became less relevant, but I'm going to say it anyway just because I had it in my head. So one of our customers, not in the public sector, is a large fast food chain for pizzas. And what they've been doing over the last couple of years is, as those pizzas are coming out of the oven, they take pictures of those. And because they serve millions of pizzas, they're able to determine when those pizzas come out, whether or not it's good / acceptable, or whether that needs to be scrapped and started over, right? And it leads to better customer satisfaction. It leads to them having all of these images of good pizzas, bad pizzas, et cetera, so that they can better understand not only what the customers are looking to buy, but also having that quality there. So that leads me to my next question, which is, I think that AI can be applied to a lot of different things, right? Machine learning can be applied to a lot of different things. Are there any, time or resource heavy tasks that typically organizations could quickly leverage machine learning and AI?
I'll jump in.
Please.
So obviously there's a lot, right? The ones that kind of immediately come to mind would be HR and security, and not just because of the volume. We probably get tens of thousands of applications a year from prospective employees, and there's obviously a lot of things that can be automated with resumes, with identifying skill sets, with predictive analysis and whatnot, and enhancing. But the reason I highlight those two in particular is because those are professions that deal with making decisions about people. You know, very nuanced judgments about someone's fit to work in intelligence, or you know, what somebody has the potential to evolve into. And to the degree that we can save and protect the time of those particular experts for that very human task, the better.
Well, and at Deloitte, like internally, you know, to extend Rachel's point, you know, obviously with 400,000 employees around the world and the continuous churn within our projects, and the need for us to apply the right resource at the right time to maintain utilization and things like that, you know, we're turning AI into our talent marketplace internally, right? So that it really helps, you know, project managers more quickly identify their requirement needs in terms of personnel with the right properly skilled, you know, who also, you know, have an interest in that particular area. And so, I mean, the talent deployment process within our firm is really being enhanced and accelerated, and obviously we've improved not only the speed with which, but the alignment of our employees to projects that they're going to be excited about and going to be skilled to deliver, you know, leveraging AI.
Sure. Now, in both of these scenarios, I feel like this speaks volumes into providing a certain, and I'll use the term data-driven again, but data-driven culture. And so I guess a long way of saying, how important is that culture versus, you know, just finding the right skill sets in order to become better at understanding your data?
Well, again, we struggle even, and so I gave an example where we've had a lot of success turning AI into the firm, right? But similar to the customers we serve, we have cultural barriers still within our firm that we overcome. You know, as we're trying to leverage AI to, you know, improve our invoice processing or other kinds of back office kind of functions, you know, we still get a lot of resistance internally from folks, you know, and so, you know, a lot of the strategies we use around the change element and ways to drive adoption, you know, we're turning into ourselves as well, because, you know, that's one of the big things is really implementing that culture to allow you to take full advantage of the technologies.
Yeah, I agree. The culture aspect is so critical, and I think it's a natural thing for humans to not want to embrace change, and so they have this immediate, you know, no to anything that's new. And a lot of this stuff is new and not the way we used to do it before. I guess I would ask you as well, like culture, how important is it, especially in public sector?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, you can't underscore it enough, especially, you know, in the IC where it's need to know. I mean, that's historically what the culture is, and it's an incredibly challenging problem. Obviously, there's kind of generational change within there. It's easier to describe with examples. I'll give you one from many years ago. There had been a push quite a long time ago to bring, you know, kind of untethered digital devices in to kind of secure environments, to let analysts get out of their cubicles so they could sit in innovation spaces and enjoy, you know, doing work on laptops and whatnot. You know, the laptops being secured and bricked and all that stuff. And there was a period of time when you saw a lot of security officers coming up to folks that were sitting down wherever using the laptops, doing their job, right? Asking, you know, what are you doing? How did you get? Because it was an unusual thing to see somebody sitting there with a device that could be wireless. It's not, right? And it had an interesting effect. You know, again, everyone's doing their job, everyone's very professional, but it was an inhibitor to folks embracing the technology and making real change. And I think it's a great example of a situation where you need leadership modeling the actual behavior that you want to see adopted, because that's what it's going to take for folks to start following in a much faster way than they otherwise would have. I could go on about culture,
I could not disagree more, or I could not agree more. Sorry, I have way too much caffeine. I could not agree more. That culture needs to be driven down from leadership all the way through and reminded and repeated. I see it time and time again in organizations where you make a big splash, and then you don't have that repetition to keep things moving forward. And so I'd almost kind of ask you, Neil, because you're across, we'll say both public and private, kind of sectors, any kind of additional comments you want to add here around where you can leverage, machine learning and AI almost immediately?
Yeah, sure. That's a really good question. I think at a base level, when people think about AI, they think about it as something that's kind of newfangled. And I think it's really helpful to just think about a machine learning model as essentially a software application with a bunch of data. And the biggest change that we've seen over the last couple of years is just our ability to be able to process increasingly large amounts of data and then kind of techniques to be able to do that. So for example, on the large language model side of the house, transformers. That's a technique that's not a kind of core relational fundamental scientific advance. Within the context of kind of tasks that machine learning is really, really good at automating, especially on the public sector side of the house, we've seen predictive maintenance as a hugely beneficial task. It allows for cost savings. It allows for increased uptime of any application. And it allows for better reliability of equipment.
Sure.
The other use case that we've seen a lot that has certain benefits as well as downsides with it, of course, is on the security and in particular cybersecurity side of the house, in particular when you're trying to deal with 0 days.
Gotcha. If I go back to predictive maintenance, because I feel like that one's something that can be cross-public, private, very easily understood. What would you say people did for predictive maintenance before machine learning and before AI?
So the thing that's always been funny to me is how many applications are essentially a variant of Excel. Excel really is kind of foundational to pretty much every business. So what happened before was, depending on the type of business, you would either have a piece of paper and a pen, and you would basically manually go through every time you maintained a system, or you would have an Excel spreadsheet. And some of your more advanced organizations would just use the average function in Excel to try to figure out, when should they actually go in and service a system or service a component part.
Yeah, I mean, Jacque, I saw that, with rotor blades, right? A perfect example, right? That maintenance has always been predicated on a certain number of flying hours with the rotor blade, right?
Yep.
But if those flying hours are in the sand versus over water versus around, I mean, it has, a material impact on the rotor blade itself. And so in the past it was, at this number of flying hours, we are going to assess the maintenance or assess the need for maintenance.
Sure.
Whereas now you have AI doing that continuously. And so, because again, there's different impact to the preparedness of that rotor blade based on the kinds of flying hours that you have.
Totally, which actually one more item to Neil's list would be safety would be a nice little add-on.
But Jacque, if I may, one more thought on adoption and culture. We've found a lot with our customers. Oftentimes particularly with artificial intelligence. You'll have your CIO or CDAO organizations that are building capabilities and models and have a tendency to push that out to the mission organizations, right? And of course, that makes adoption a lot more difficult. And what we see, as we support our clients in implementing and rolling out AI, the importance of really doing that hip pocket with the actual mission operators themselves. And I think we actually have a good example of that here with the Army Software Factory. I'm real proud of the Army for what they've done there. And that's taking soldiers from many military occupational specialties, bringing them here, building software, but then they go back out into the field and help with that adoption because they're bringing a requirements mindset, a soldier's mindset, a military occupational specialty mindset to the development of that software. So they're part of the solutioning, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas very similarly with AI, we see that where if we're iterating alongside the operators who really know what is the question we're trying to answer with the data,
yep.
It really creates that, that adoption and builds this team culture where it's, hey, we're just trying to push you newfangled technology versus you all help us to figure out how these capabilities can advance your ability to operate effectively.
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Neil.
Sorry.
I think that's equally true on the private sector side of the house as well. A lot of organizations, when they start thinking about a new technology, like adopting machine learning, start with a machine learning center of excellence. They hire some PhDs, they hire some smart folks, they take their internal resources, and they try to experiment with the technology. They try to figure out what are use cases or ways to use that technology that makes sense, and then they move it to the business line, where each business line has a separate team working in concert with their technology organization to actually develop solutions for specific business problems that they have. I think that also works really well on the defense side of the house, and from kind of an analogy point of view, it really gets down to how much of what we need to do from a machine learning perspective within defense is kind of innovation versus invention. How much of it is applying, machine learning libraries that exist to problems that are there versus how much of it is, foundational advances.
Yeah, we used to, at VMware Labs, we used to articulate this message of if you have the right platform to deploy applications that's secure and scalable and can grow as you're growing, and you combine that with the right process and methodology in order to iterate quickly, and then you have one more aspect of being able to take the data and learn from it so that you can iterate on the applications quicker and more easily. That kind of goes to what you were saying of like, let's work with the end users, understand how they're interacting with the applications, what benefit are they actually getting out of it versus are we making their lives harder or more difficult or more onerous, which, at the end of the day, you have this virtuous cycle of innovation that kind of happens, not necessarily invention, to your point, Neil. So in all of this scenario, my next question really was around, in your jobs, how have you, what are your experiences with integrating machine learning and AI into existing and I'll say even legacy applications and processes, because we know we're not just inserting something new without having all of the legacy stuff to actually still keep running, I'll say the business or the mission.
Let me jump in, and I'm gonna pull a thread that Roger raised earlier and that Neil raised, and that's around teamwork to try and do this. And we're trying to kind of flip the model. So we have 17 very different intelligence agents, 18 very different intelligence agencies, different missions, different trade crafts. There's a program that we're starting that started last summer called the Public-Private Talent Exchange, where we can bring folks in, we can push people out. And it's not a new concept, but to the point of integration, one thing that we would like to try and do is, if we're working with a private sector company, to try and get individuals from different intelligence agencies out to the same company, working on the same project to try and encourage, force, whatever word you want to use, integration from the outside. It gets those folks working together as a team. It's much easier to do in that direction than to try and do it from the inside. And so when you push people back out, they form relationships, bring them back, they're there, but the added bonus is also they had a chance to really learn from the private sector and see what a cycle or what an ML ops cycle looks like without the constraints, the necessary constraints that the IC has to operate under.
Do you, to your culture question earlier, what is the incentive for those folks to be pushed out? Are they self-motivated, or is that some other driving force saying like, oh, I also want to work with the other 17? Because I feel like sometimes just because 16 of my sister agencies are working together, it doesn't mean that I want to do that too.
I think our community is as hungry as any other community to just understand the big picture. It's really, really hard to stay on top of the big picture with how fast everything's moving. And there is an insatiable curiosity from intelligence officers as to how is this stuff happening on the outside? What are the nuances of your daily work life? What are the decisions that are being made? Why are certain things happening? Let me back up for a sec. There's kind of a saying that we have. When you start in the IC, your acumen's up here, and your tradecraft is down here, intelligence tradecraft. And over time, it inverts. your acumen generally starts to kind of go down with respect to a lot of what's happening externally, because that's not where your focus necessarily is, and your tradecraft goes up. And that needs to come back in balance because of the pace of everything happening. Yeah, the motivation is curiosity. You know, they're patriots, and they're hungry to understand the private sector and how to work together. Final point on that. The other benefit is, you know, if any of you have worked with the government, or if you are the government, you know that conversations between the government or public sector and private sector, they can tend to sometimes be kind of stilted. It feels like kind of like a vendor-client relationship, and so you talk about partnerships, and that's not the way the conversation feels. And so to the extent that we can have our officers, and you know, on both sides, get comfortable talking as partners, true partners, is going to go a long way.
A follow-on question to that would be, as those people are pushed out and then come back inside, how easy or hard is it for them to, you know, deliver that message all the way through the organization, or maybe not message, but those learnings, to apply those learnings within the organization?
So it's a lot to ask the individuals, right? I don't know that at an individual level a lot would necessarily spread, but the power is potentially in use cases that you can bring back inside, or that you can initiate from inside the IC with many of those same people that you had that you were working with on the outside.
Okay, so then my next question is really around how do those individuals help prepare their individual organizations to be ready for AI, to be ready for machine learning, to take advantage of it?
You have to speak up. I mean, there's a lot of junior officers that don't necessarily have as big a voice as they should. And this also speaks, you know, I'm going to link it back to the HR and the talent piece of it in the beginning, is, you know, making sure that upstream all of those incentive structures are aligned to get the best out of people, to be generous with their gifts, to be generous with their talents, to really be a part of the team and be motivated for the team to succeed, is where a lot of the vocalization around preparing for AI has to come. It's not necessarily AI, it's preparing your culture for moving quickly and being incredibly generous with your teammates.
Agreed. So now I'm going to ask you, I was talking to one of your competitors not that long ago, and a hot topic that has been a hot topic for many years has been around modernization, digital transformation, app modernization, however you want to define it. All of it really means, you know, kind of getting better, some of that process and methodology that I'm talking about. But what this gentleman told me, which was super interesting, in his purview of across multiple sectors, multiple verticals, when his customers are asking about transformation, they're actually asking about data modernization and data transformation, because so many of the apps that they want to build are hamstrung because they don't have access to the data in a either timely or in a rich way. And I'm just curious if you and your organization see the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see, you know, with our customers, you know, data management is still relatively sloppy across our customer base. And I don't mean that critically. It's hard. It's not easy, right? Particularly as you continue to amass more and more data and have common standards across your organization. It's a difficult thing to do. It's not easy, but it does start there. And, you know, as our customers are also getting more savvy, you know, with how to apply, you know, AI, machine learning, one of the other is, you know, how do we apply it to areas where data may not exist? That's another area. And so we're finding the need now to have the ability to create more and more synthetic data, to be able to run through models where data doesn't exist, to start thinking about future advanced usage of AI and machine learning in the future. And so it's one part, to your point, and more importantly, having better data management, which then allows you to have the data to be able to do and take full advantage of these technologies, but it's also applying these kinds of technologies in areas where the data doesn't exist. And that's where we're really excited. You know, moving from, you know, hard selectors, you know, an IP address or things like that, you know, to now more behavior as a selector, right?
Sure, yeah.
That you're going to have different forms of data, and they're going to be in different ways of maturity and access. And so that's, I think, what we're really excited to work through with our customers is, is to apply it in more advanced ways, as I just described.
Got it. And so this actually mirrors one of our customers is Purdue University. And during the pandemic, they never shut down. And the reason they were able to do that was because they knew where their students were all the time. They knew what the students were eating and whom they were eating with. And so they could start doing graph analytics of like, oh, here's an outbreak, here's the likely other folks that might be impacted, and segregate them and never actually have any of the
Contact
tracing stuff. Yeah. So my question to all three of you guys would be, per what you both said, how important is the whole data security and privacy thing to building accurate machine learning models that you can make use of?
I think it's critical on a couple of fronts. So one, even going back to our HR kind of example from earlier, there is a very, very large tech company, over 500 billion in market cap, that should give a couple of companies for you to select in your mind, that tried using machine learning to select engineers. And what they found was that they had so many more male engineers than female engineers that their machine learning model incorrectly classified out female engineers. And they didn't go through a proper data cleansing process as they were actually training their machine learning models. They didn't have the right class balances in place, meaning their data prep process was wrong. And because their data prep process was wrong, down the line, as the machine learning model was deployed in production, it wasn't working.
And when you say wrong, can I just tease that out a little bit? Like wrong in that we needed more expertise, or we need a different platform or different data, or what do you mean by wrong?
So I'm going to pick proximate numbers rather than precise numbers, but they had 100,000 male resumes in there and let's say 10,000 female resumes in there, and the class balance of the two data sets was completely wrong. They had way too much data from one group and not enough data from another group.
And how would you, knowing that now, how would you propose fixing that, or at least educating another organization who maybe doesn't have the experience on being able to essentially be more well-rounded in choosing the data that you're using to train the model?
I think there are a couple parts to it. One, I think there is the actual kind of technical conversation and the technical kind of understanding, and making sure that you have data scientists in the room when you're having and trying to figure out how to apply a machine learning model to a specific problem. Two, in their specific case, they should have just picked a subset of both types of employees and just trained the machine learning model on an equivalent amount of data from each representative group. And there are a couple of other things that we can do, but that's getting a little bit more complicated. And then three, I think it gets to that end-to-end process and the end-to-end tools, technology, and software that you're using from a data security perspective, from a synthetic data generation perspective, all the way to model monitoring and models deployed in production. And I think having that technical understanding, having the right tools and best-in-class tools on an end-to-end basis in place, and the right expertise is really how you're able to get to successfully created machine learning efforts.
Sure. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I want to build off a great point that Neil made there. You know, as we think about at Deloitte trustworthy AI, setting aside the importance, obviously, starting with privacy and security of the data, one of the big thing is transparency and explainability, right? We actually had I was not there, but one of our teams was briefing a personnel and readiness model to the CDAO of DoD, so Mr. Martell. And as they were explaining it, they literally in our slide deck, we had the equations, on the slide.
Okay.
And of course, being as technically savvy as he is, he wanted them to decompose and talk about what is that E in that equation, right? And so there again, it's the transparency. Sure. and being able to explain it. And as the savviness of the individual, such as Mr. Martell, continues to increase, being able to be transparent versus, well, just trust the model in this black box and it's going to spit out what you want, is we're seeing a lot more. And I think that's a fantastic aspect. But to Neil's point, you got to have the technical folks. Roger could not have conducted that meeting, right? I could not have said, here's why the formula.
You don't know what he is?
I did not. But again, having the right folks there to ensure that you lower the risk of having the data not be done done, and then therefore the model not work is right, is having those technical people in the room that can do that as well.
Sure. I have a consulting background, so I loosely think of this as making sure you have the right expertise to help guide you along the way. Because, you know, I'll pick on something Neil said, something about the best tools and processes that are available, and I actually almost step back a little bit and kind of say the best for your organization. Because a lot of organizations are not savvy enough to use XYZ technology or ABC. And then even worse, if they are savvy enough to do it, the rest of the organization isn't savvy enough to include it into the applications and the processes that they need to in order to get the benefit. And so like, oftentimes people forget about their own individuals and the organization's, you know, ability to succeed. Which kind of leads me to another question of, you know, in general, either within your organizations or organizations that you're working with, what roles can you see AI playing here in a short period of time, let's say in the next 18 to 36 months, in ways that will actually help them either monetize or reduce cost or better, you know, excel in a mission?
It's open source, right? It's unclassified data, and to the extent that we can have our analysts increasingly know how to and have the freedom to use the tools on the outside and partner with industry is massive. So in addition to automating more and more of kind of the obvious, it's getting folks to a place where we can start leveraging everything externally as quickly as possible at the speed that a lot of the technology is coming out. One piece on that with respect to kind of the taskings, with respect to like all the outsourced analysts, we have to get this right. We have to be able to augment human creativity, human capacity to the best possible extent. That is a no-fail situation. It's kind of interesting with respect to the last question on security because you know, transparency and explainability with, you know, intelligence assessments, that's the core of what the IC does. And analysts have to be confident in what they're communicating up the chain and to the policymakers. And I think there's a really interesting space developing now around what is the analog to analytic standards. What is that thing that is going to give analysts the ability to just unleash, you know, their potential out there? One thing I would love to see, I don't know if it's going to happen in the next, you know, I'm going to say it wouldn't happen in 18 months, but being able to democratize simulation and gaming and modeling to everybody, you know, and I think that's where the synthetic data can play a huge role because of the need to know issues, right? There's a lot of conversations that need to happen, and they don't necessarily organically happen across domains within the IC because of kind of this need to know principle. And you know, in some cases it's a very real thing, in other cases it's culture. But if we can get folks to a place where they are able to run simulations at their desks on just ideas that are coming to them, rather than spending a lot of time going through just the coordination process alone, I mean, the tasks that would, you know, anyway, I'm going to stop there. But
Rachel, to build
very passionate about this topic.
To build off your point, like I use the example of creating synthetic data because data may not have existed.
Exactly.
But to your point, the actual one of the more recent projects we had is the customer did not want us to use their data as we were building the models. Yep. So we created synthetic data to build the models to gain their confidence and trust in the models, to then give us access to the data, right? So it's not if it doesn't exist, to your point, it has to do with the classifications and the need to know. And
it opens up conversations.
Absolutely.
That otherwise would not have happened.
Yeah.
Now you said one term, I just want to make sure I understood it correctly. You said open source, and I wasn't sure if you meant open source software or just transparency in...
The ocean of unclassified data, which is, you know, the area where all the insights are going to come from. You know, that's kind of that's the big nut to crack, right? It's you know, the amount of classified data that an officer, you know, relies on for the big picture is tiny compared to the unclassified volume that it's complemented with. Again, the big picture. Very, very difficult to stay on top of the big picture, and it's probably safe to assume that at any given time, nobody really has the whole big picture. It's a constantly shifting thing. You know, this is not something where you can be like, okay, I'm on top of this, I got it. You know, no, you've got to get extremely comfortable with the fact that there is no end state. This is an ongoing you know, scenario that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. And so, funny enough, one of our customers, we have a number of customers who are tax agencies around the world and leverage our machine learning models and platform to look for fraudulent activity. They just released a report, one of them, who said 14,000% ROI based on creating this program back in 2015 to look for fraud. And they actually credited it because it was a platform that allowed them to continue to stay in front of the fraudsters by iterating on the models in a regular real-time basis. When they originally chose us, it was all SaaS analytics. However, over time, they've really embraced some of this open source, which is where I was going with the whole thing. Some of this like Python and R and some of the natural languages that you can leverage when you take advantage of open source. And what they've found is that finding new developers and new analysts today, it's really hard if you're not using some of these newer open sourcey technologies, because that's what they're learning in college. That's what the commercial sector is primarily trying to do. I was just curious how impactful open source itself was on your guys' missions, your customers, et cetera. And even Neil, like the other customers that you interact with, how important is that?
Well, I think part of it, and this goes back to the kind of culture, people, HR discussion, is a skill set challenge. Where, how do you have enough folks that actually understand how to build machine learning models inside of an organization. I know with our customers, one of the challenges that we often see is they really have this end outcome that they want to accomplish, whether it's saving money through increased productivity gains, whether it's being able to prevent fraud by analyzing lots of data that's coming in. And oftentimes they are using fundamental kind of open source platforms, open source machine learning libraries, but B, on top of that, they're adding in the skilled workforce, the talent, and the technologies that allow them to actually be able to deploy them at scale.
So I know I wanted to leave some time for questions from the audience. We have a wide range of skill set here, from deeply technical, like Roger.
I take very much pride in that.
to within the agency, to commercial. Any questions from the audience around anything that we talked about today?
Just a general quick question. When at least a lot of the people that I know going into my industry and the corporate field, we are seeing a lot of current points right now with AI having an issue when it comes to diversity and other biases due to how the, formulas are formed. And since it's still going to be most likely in the soon-to-see future be a part of almost any space, be it military, corporate, what have you, how do you see us going forwards societally, or even just economic and business-wise, when it comes to taking the either knowing or subconscious biases of those that are formulating the AI algorithms and combating it?
Well, I think that's probably one of the initial concerns, around generative, AI, right? Is how can we be assured that they're free of bias, in many different types of bias. I think that's something that as we get deeper in taking full advantage of that, and I'm sure Neil would be able to speak a lot more in depth to this. I think that's, as we think about things as a firm, that's front of mind for us. And as part of our trustworthy AI, it's really how do we take the bias out of anything we're doing related to artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think it's going to be harder to do or more challenging to do with generative AI moving forward.
We, about 2 years ago, and it needs updating, but the IC published the AI ethics principles and framework. to help guide the design and the development and use of these systems to the greatest extent possible without bias, with transparency, with explainability. And we rely heavily on the work that our DoD colleagues are doing, especially in the CDAO office with respect to AI assurance, as well as the work that NIST is doing with the risk management framework that recently came out. I would love to see like a whole of national security kind of principles on this, as opposed to something just for the IC or just for DoD. But it's a huge issue, and there's a lot of folks paying attention to it. One other piece of that, the ICCDO, the Chief Data Officers, they're about to release a new data strategy for the IC, which addresses a lot of these points.
And I'll throw out there from a transformation standpoint, I feel like separating AI is probably not what we want to do. We're really trying to build smart applications at the end of the day. And one of the things that we espouse in our software factory creations is this idea of test-driven development. And a lot of this idea of synthetic data generation, I think it needs to be integrated into any model that gets created. We have a life cycle. We have to continue testing that model to make sure those biases aren't in there. And if that's not a core part of your process and methodology, likely you're going to suffer from it.
Yeah.
I think that also gets back to the very fact that AI is really just a software application with data on top of it. So it's a data question in many ways, much more so than it is a application question. But the answer is similar in the same way as you have kind of DevSecOps as a broad-based term, or the idea of shifting left in your development process. So too, on the machine learning side of the house, you have MLSecOps, and you have this idea of shifting left to the underlying process of actually training your machine learning model, setting your hyperparameters, moving to deployment.
Absolutely.
Hi. I'm very curious for your thoughts. Usually enterprise technology has like no consumer overlap, right? But now with AI, we're seeing it also becoming like a consumer product that anybody can interact with, these chatbots or generative tools. Do you see any challenges and or opportunities from the fact that like there's the general population is now also getting a cultural and personal understanding of machine learning and how these models work and will affect their lives? Usually a lot of it happens without us knowing how that stuff works. So I'm really curious for your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm going to answer that question with maybe an interesting click. I think, as the whole of society gets more comfortable and savvy with artificial intelligence, I think we have to consider that, we are as a firm considering that in the talent experience we're going to give to these individuals in the future, right? The professionals that are coming into our firm right now are so technologically savvy. We have to rethink the way that we train them, the experience that we give them to retain them or be able to attract them. We haven't really had an opportunity through the questions to this point to really talk about the talent aspect of this, which is important as the cultural aspects and adoption aspects that we've talked about. And we need to recognize, because in all facets of our life, AI exists, how is that going to posture people, future professionals, and what they're going to want to experience in either applying it through their career or their job, or just in general, the way that we're going to engage with them and provide them their career experience within our organizations. And I will tell you specifically with our firm, we're thinking tremendously about that, right? And I mean, the old ways that future operators were going to be trained are much different than the way they're probably going to be trained today, And so, because we have to assume that they're coming in much more advanced. So, it's interesting. And, even now we have an onboarding chat box, right, at Deloitte, right? So, I mean, as you're going through and you're like, how do I fill out this digital form? Well, you don't have to try to find the right person to talk to anymore. It's all, and they're very comfortable with that, right? Whereas I wouldn't be real comfortable with that, right? At least when I got started many, many years ago. So I just wanted to address it more from a future talent, considerations we're going to have as we move forward as a result of what you described.
To that point, I mean, the fact that there's kind of a closing of the gap between the IC and the general public in terms of understanding and being kind of on the same page. At the end of the day, the folks that work in the IC are US citizens, and they do everything everybody else does, and they're learning about this stuff at the same time, and that's phenomenal. To the talent point, we'd love to see more and more of these capabilities embedded in the workflow of our officers, disembodied in the background, so it's helping. But to the talent point, to the extent that we can discover kind of, organically who has the potential to become, a data scientist, and maybe they were hired as a China expert. Right. We're not going to hire our way out of this. We're not going to human-machine team our way out of this. But it is so fascinating to see the range of interest and the range of potential of our officers. And that, again, goes back to HR again, in that, vacancies and job descriptions and all that, those can't, and I'd say this is probably in the private sector too, it can't keep pace with the potential of what your people can do. And so to the extent that we can identify that and then put people on, on training paths to reinvent themselves is a phenomenal thing.
Well, and I feel like you said it best earlier when you said AI has the ability to take, it's like the rocket ship for your mind, yeah. Right? So and I'll give you two quick examples. One, I recently did a presentation where I told ChatGPT who was going to be in the audience and what they wanted to hear, and it wrote all of the talking points of that presentation. I just had to provide the use cases and the value. And so I almost feel like, to your question, we're getting closer and closer to that Star Trek nirvana where we can up-level everybody. And that second example I was going to give was I was able to ask, again, ChatGPT, hey, give me an example of how to load a database using stream sets DBT in Python. And it writes it all out, and it's all there. Now I could give that to somebody, and instead of having to think about all that low-level stuff, now we can up-level into actually getting the mission done faster and easier and quicker.
Yeah, thank you for the great discussion so far. I work for Morgan Stanley Inclusive Ventures Lab. We're a startup accelerator that focuses on diverse founders. My question, I guess, in the startup ecosystem, companies I've worked with have struggled to sell to enterprise or just large organizations because there's many hurdles, whether it's SOC 2 compliance or you solve one narrow set of solutions very well and the incumbent might do 10 solutions quite poorly. I just want to know if you have any, I guess, suggestions for any founders in this room or startups in general, how they might be able to engage with organizations that either represent or clients that you've worked with in the past.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts here to start. So one, I think the game that you're playing is fundamentally different when you set out to start a company that works with governments or works with the largest enterprises. I've always thought it's much more of a game of chess than kind of the game of checkers that consumer or SMB or even mid-market is, because your sales cycles are so long. They're 12 months, sometimes 18 months to get your first government contract, that you really have to make sure that you're lining up all of your kind of T's and dotting your I's along the way. And you really have to be ready for how long that sales cycle is going to be from a planning perspective. So first, I think it comes down to expectations and being aware of the fact that when you're selling into the deep enterprise or you're selling into government, you're dealing with mission critical systems that have enormous impacts associated with them and organizational risk felt by that very fact. Two, I think it's knowing what your go-to-market motion is, how you're actually kind of going in and selling. And then three, I think starting with as narrow of an audience as possible and starting with as focused and tailored of an offering as possible. Everyone always likes quoting Paul Graham, but make your first 50 customers as delighted as they could possibly be before you focus on any larger market than that.
With regards to the government, at least, we've done a lot of investment over the last several years in cloud. We've got the commercial cloud enterprise now, and that is a great model for getting to the enterprise immediately. So rather than having lots of little contracts, and companies trying to come in and have a big impact, there's a vehicle out there to go big to begin with, or at least start engaging in a conversation that is starting with the objective of scale rather than something narrow. And one other point, we've been talking a lot about AI with respect to a whole bunch of things, but this is really about the convergence a lot of different technologies, things that are going to come after this that are, we have to pay attention to and understand how this is going to all continue to be contextualized into a much more interesting future that we're rolling towards.
Yeah, those are great points. I'll just add to that I think I see just at Deloitte as a large firm. I think we're required to be good stewards to small businesses and non-traditional companies that have done business with the government to help partner with them and get them over. You probably heard the term the valley of death, right? They have great capabilities, but it's very difficult to get them to scale, within government, through the procurement process. And I will say, I'll speak for our firm, and I'd like to believe our competitors are doing the same, and I think they are. It's our responsibility to recognize great capability out there through our ecosystems and alliances and things, and partner, to bring the very best to our government to solve the missions. I mean, I know, the folks on my team, are deeply committed to a sense of purpose and making an impact and supporting the missions of the customer we serve, right? And so if we don't organically have a capability, being able to recognize who does and partner with them, particularly if they don't have as much of a channel, into our customers as we might, but really partnering with them to do what's right for our customers. I think that's a mindset, a partnerial mindset that I think we all should have.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
I think we have time for one more question.
We do, okay.
We'll be able to wrap it up. I think it's over there somewhere. There it is.
Great. Hi. Sorry. Make it fast. I lead data insights and foresight for a global corporation, and we spend a lot of time focusing on the cognitive and human diversity. We just spoke about that. The data diversity, and we found that those two unlock incredible competitive intelligence. Now, thinking forward, we're starting to think about AI diversity, and maybe it's just software diversity, but what might you say about that to bring that into the mix, and might we be thinking about DE&I in the AI world sometime in the near future?
So I'll throw out something that it's just getting some attention. Obviously, the experts in the room, this will be old news, but really interesting about what, as we're approaching AGI, what that actually means, right? So don't discount the, I don't know, call it the metadata of a human, right? All of the things that you experience over the course of collecting data is very different than where a machine is just experiencing the collection of the data. It's not, that's backwards. Humans experiencing the collection of the data, right, that a machine cannot capture because it is being fed the data. It didn't collect it itself. And I think there's a fascinating conversation around how that is going to play with regards to being able to incorporate just the diversity of the human experience into, as we move forward into how AI is developing, because that's the piece that's missing with respect to a lot of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I guess I would last close it, first I want to thank all the panelists for coming, but to that question I would say, we have learned over the last probably 5 years how important D&I is to enrich what we're doing, things that we just didn't realize. And so while it's probably a very kind of nascent beginning, it's going to be super critical if we really want this to add value to everyone's lives. But again, we'll probably be around if you guys have any questions after the setting to talk to these fine people. Thank you, guys.
That's great. Yeah. Great conversation.